Brilliance Audio presents The Bluestocking by Christi Caldwell, performed by Tim Campbell. It was as though someone had died, and in a way someone had. This would be a physical loss felt throughout the club, leaving the unlikely home silent in ways it had never been. Gertrude Killoran stared blankly at the maids folding shirts and garments and placing them in neat piles upon an immaculate four-poster bed. Small garments packed up to be gone forevermore, and never returned. Stacks of fine wool trousers and jackets alongside tattered scraps better fit for a street urchin, torn cotton shirts, coarse wool, muddied shoes. Her throat spasmed. "I have it!" All the while the servants, so very focused on their work, continued on, methodical in their task. Gather, fold, pile, repeat. Her quiet words were less of a command and more of a statement, and their whispery soft quality lent the order an air of weakness. The only one to pay her any heed was the grey tabby at her feet. Gus nudged his head against her legs and purred. All these years Gertrude had been known as the weak Killoran. Blind in one eye, she was the cripple whom no one saw any true value in, at least not in the way one was valued in the streets. And in this instance, her young brother Stephen being carted off away from this household they'd shared to the true home he'd been born to, she confronted the reality of her character. And mayhap she was weak. Because if she were as strong as she'd always considered herself to be, then she'd muster a greater show of strength than this, for her brother's benefit. She'd have packed his garments herself, offered him words of strength and encouragement. Something. He deserved that. He deserved more in the face of uncertainty, because of all he'd suffered and the pain he would forever know. From where she stood at the windows overlooking the streets outside the Devil's Den, the glass panes reflected a pair of footmen behind her, entering her brother's rooms with yet another trunk. Another one to fill with Stephen's things, taking all with him when he was gone. "Oh, God!" With jerky movements, she rushed over to the unfolded garments. "I have them," she said, her voice slightly pitched, and something in it cut across the bustling activity that had existed in this room throughout the day. The maids looked up with bereaved eyes, tear-filled ones. Stephen would not see tears, not today, not on his final day inside the Devil's Den. "I said I have them," she repeated, agony making her tone sharper than she'd intended. "You may go." Gertrude looked to the four sombre servants. "All of you." The group of servants hesitated. Even though Gertrude had taken on a greater role at the clubs since her sisters had married, it was still new to the staff. They likely didn't truly know what to do with this commanding version of her usually collected self. "Now," she said curtly when they made no move to leave. The pair of maids relinquished the garments in their hands and filed after the footman. They closed the door in their wake so that Gertrude was left alone. Her breath came slow and shallow, straining to hear the constricted walls of her chest as she stared at the oak panel of Stephen's door, nicked and scarred from the tip of the dagger he'd hurled at it, a street game he'd carried with him into the club. It was just one more physical proof of the wrongness of his having lived here, and of the life he'd been forced to live as a member of their family. They'd brought irrevocable harm to him, in every way. But how were they to have known? She bit hard at her lower lip, scrabbling the flesh. How were they to have known that the young boy brought into their gang, squalling and incoherently inconsolable, as he'd wailed for his mum and da, had in fact been a Marquess and Marchioness's son? How were they to have known Stephen had been kidnapped from the comfortable, exalted folds of the peerage and plunged into the living hell and squalor of St. Giles? And now he would return. Still, by polite society standards, a boy in years, but in the suffering he'd endured and the hell he'd visited upon others at the behest of their gang leader, Mac Diggory, Stephen was more jaded than a man who'd lived 60 years.